Welcome to Catholic Homeschool Radio, where we begin conversations to help parents enrich their lives and make practical decisions for the future.
Priscilla McCaffrey again, and still we're talking with Karen Anderson and Amy Kelley, two good friends from New York, and we all have kids going on in college, and we're discussing the whole college thing, college expenses, whether or not kids need to go to college. We discussed a little bit in the last section what college was like for the older generation. And now I'd like to know, looking at the millennials, they have a huge student debt. It's, as I had said in the previous program, it's a staggering $1.2 trillion. And so did they get their money's worth? Did these kids get their money's worth? Do you look at them and say, well, it was worth it for them to be $30,000 to $50,000 in debt? And now our kids, if they have an unplanned and unthought out education path, they would have the same thing. We could expect that to happen. So should that very fact be prohibitive, or at least it should give us pause? So, of course, some kids they're going to go to college and they have a good plan. I think Amy, I like how things sound at your household. It just it sounds so well managed, and the guys know what they're about, what they're going to do. So can you? It would give people courage, or it would encourage them, I think, to know that there are some avenues where their kids can be successful without debt.
Well, I hope so. I mean, who knows? My children still haven't proven themselves successful. And I would never describe my household as well managed, but for sure, I think most Americans live near community colleges. Community colleges are very cheap. Both of my sons, they have to pay full freight at the community college. It's still completely affordable for working teenagers. In fact, my older son, I always like to brag that as he pays for college, his net worth increases because he's saving more money overall than he puts out. And
fantastic. What kind of work does he do?
Well, he's a golf caddy.
Oh, that's the best. I love that. I had nephews who did that.
It's
fantastic.
It's just really great out in the open air and everything. That's his main job, and he'll do a little of this, a little of that, and I think that, as you said, it is definitely the case that those who aren't in debt may well marry people who are in debt, but that's great. That's half the debt it could have been. Mm-hmm. And as for $50,000 worth of debt, $30,000 to $50,000, I didn't realize that was the average, but for sure, if my child was accepted to a great engineering school and they could somehow manage to graduate with only $50,000 in debt, I would actually be elated. Mm-hmm. Because I know kids that have graduated with engineering degrees and they start, many of them start at $90,000. Mm-hmm. So I think that there are times there are times when you can prudently assume that kind of debt. I mean, I think we would all agree that medical school, law school, those kinds of professional schools, I think the money is well worth borrowing. But for undergraduate
not
degrees,
legal so much anymore because it's more and more difficult for young lawyers to get jobs.
Right. I guess I would say
it's a crisis. Medical, we desperately need doctors.
Doctors, right? Well, I'd say for lawyers, like still you can pick and choose your law school carefully because many law schools will remit or rebate or whatever they call it part of your debt if you do various jobs for a certain amount of years. One of my sisters did that. She worked for a public defender's office, and she was able to get rid of some of her law school debt that way. And of course, law school is like anything else. Well, with lawyers, if you go to a great law school, the debt's totally worth it because you can get a great job. And if you want to go to a lesser law school, like a law school that's not a big name, you would really have to think about it, I guess. Mm-hmm. But yeah, so I hope that my sons will graduate debt-free, totally debt-free.
Mm-hmm. I have tons of nieces and nephews. I guess I have about 90 nieces and nephews. So
that's fabulous.
It's interesting. I've been able to see I know how their families are. I have a sense of the culture of the families, and they've done pretty well, I would say, in putting themselves through college. And there isn't a lot of debt. They're very responsible. They've always worked ever since they were, also 14. You said, Regina. has started work. Is it a job or a babysitting or?
No, she works at the front desk at the pool.
Oh, that's
Yes, job.
terrific. I love that. That's great for them too. Except babysitting, that is where they bring in the bucks now, especially in this town. It's unbelievable.
You know what? It's so
What they'll pay
true.
for.
But I have to say, Regina's like me. She's not really a natural born babysitter. I think my daughter Mary will be the babysitter.
Oh, good. Well, that'll be nice for Regina.
Yeah, that's right.
So it is possible to get through the university, but people have to be very realistic about it, and sometimes it's good to take a gap year. A very high percentage of college students who enter as freshmen do not graduate or do not go on to sophomore years. To their sophomore year, I had a percentage around here, but it's
fascinating.
considerable. So they can say they went to college, but it didn't work for them. But it really is because they weren't meant to be there at that time. They weren't mature enough, or nothing, nothing really attracted them or helped them to focus. So whether or not it's, whether or not the debt is worth it or the cost is worth it really depends on the student, I would say. Also, I do think that in a lot of places they're not really getting an education. Now, you had said you weren't necessarily sending your kids to college for an education, which is almost a radical thing to say. But you said it with such complacency that you have long accepted the realities, I think, that they're going to have to get an education or at least enrich themselves intellectually somewhere else, and that's okay too. That's great. So we'll talk about that later in the program.
I just want to say one more thing about debt. I think that debt is debt. I always tell my kids, debt. When you take on debt, you're saying, "I promise that I'm willing and able to pay this back, within the scope of my current knowledge." And I think that I'm sure that we all tell our children, if you're going to major in something like, Mesopotamian studies or something, like something where you're going to need a graduate degree,
Right.
or something that isn't a clear path to a job, you really can't sign on the dotted line and say, "I promise I'm going to pay you back this large amount of money." You're actually telling a lie.
I know, but you know what? The bureaucracies kind of wink at this, and they know what the average, how much these young people are going to be making in the colleges, or excuse me, when they graduate. And there's a lot of encouragement to go into these studies, and so they're unrealistic, and I think that's unethical.
I agree. I think
what goes on.
I think that's unethical, but I also wonder, isn't it? Doesn't the student bear some of the responsibility? I put myself through college, and I never borrowed any money to do it because I knew full well I wouldn't be able to pay it back.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but we've been keeping the kids for so long. I mean, a lot of kids they don't know what it is to take care of themselves.
I know. I mean, to start to actually think about this question, you really have to go way, way back to how are we raising our kids? And a huge portion of America is raising their kids to be very narcissistic. And I think it's odd because, it's kind of a complicated situation to be talking about this with homeschooling moms who in general are not, versus the population at large, which is, and they are by default. It's not like they intended to raise a bunch of self-centered kids, but it's just because things have become expected and things have become easy to acquire on a certain level. They're used to just giving the kid the thing that helps them get through the next stage. Something that just doesn't happen that easily to us when we have more than, say, 3 kids. Once you start hitting the large family thing, you can't just give your kids everything that everybody else is giving them.
Right.
So the idea of paying your way through college, taking a gap year. I know my daughter was saying, my second daughter who's currently in college, my first has graduated. a lot of her classmates, even, and this is at a good Catholic college, a lot of them will show up late or not show up for class, and it really affects their grade. She said, I'm shocked at how she went down, and she actually took a gap year and earned a bit of money last year so that she could pay for part of her college. And she was surprised. She said, I sat down, Mom, and I figured out how much each class costs me. And she said, there is no way I'm going to throw that away. So
good for her. You know what? That would be a great
fabulous.
exercise for those kids, each kid, at the beginning of the year, to sit down with a pencil and paper and find out what their education is costing them or their parents or someone else. And I think as a result of the narcissism, you have this generation that is angling for us, the taxpayers,
Yes,
to pay for their
exactly.
education, for their Mesopotamian studies.
And I find that so frustrating.
That's, yeah, it's just,
and unfortunately,
there's some
their
injustice
parents, parents are backing them up in this.
Of course, because look at all the taxpayers we've provided for their 2 kids. We have 15 kids, and so take from their money, their hard-earned money, and apply it to those kids. that just doesn't.
And taxpayer dollars already subsidize higher education to such an extent. That's why community colleges and state schools are so dirt cheap.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But I was shocked to discover, and I think I'm continually seeing this, that even this is, my daughter's experience. She's going to a small Catholic school, which is, you could say, a very, hand-picked almost bunch of people who have the right ideals, and yet their kids still don't have this idea of this is costing somebody something. I'm going to make the most of it. They're still blowing off classes and things like that. So I think there is actually a crisis and a failure even amongst many homeschooling people.
I think that's true. It's a character problem, and yes, I guess one of our problems, and this is the whole Orthodox Christian Catholic community, is, hey, we're pro-life. So somehow, we're, therefore our kids are, they've stood up against the culture, and then they should have special privileges because, hey, they're pro-life. And so they've set the bar pretty low about what it means to be a good Christian.
Yes.
To be a good Christian is not equivalent with being pro-life. I'm sorry, that's minimum. The minimum is you don't murder people, okay? Now, as a responsible Christian, how are you going to live that life? And I think you're really right. And I think probably we have indulged our kids. You're special, you're great, we're doing these other things, we're doing these alternative things. And so we want to build them up. We want to build up their confidence, but at the same time, we want to say, get real, let's not, if someone gives you a task, don't think you're being great just for showing up. I have a sister-in-law who works in retail, and she said it's so hard to work with the younger people because they act as if they are giving you a break by just showing up. And so, that's the culture that our kids work in too. And we don't want them to think, well, I'm not going to rip you off, so you should be glad I'm working here. We have to set the bar higher for our kids. We have to articulate that.
That's actually really interesting. And I look forward to thinking about that more. But one thing that comes to mind is you're saying that so many freshmen drop out after freshman year.
Yeah, it is.
And I think the average college student these days might finish in 6 years. So maybe the kids at St. Thomas More they should have taken a gap year.
I hate to say this, but some of them did. Actually, some of them transferred.
Maybe they needed 2 years.
Yeah. But I really, I am a big fan of the gap year. I think it gives them a year to think about things before they're rushing off to college, a year to solidify the lessons they've learned. The only exception I would say is if one of my kids got a scholarship, a full ride scholarship, I would say, okay, don't take the gap year, you can go.
Go right now.
But other than that, I think I was happier with the way the gap year went than my other daughter who didn't take a gap year. I just think she absorbed more life lessons.
And I think the gap year is best done the way that your daughter did it. Where you make real money and you use it to pay some of your own bills.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
That's critical to the gap year experience in my mind. And I think it's important too that we tell our children at some point, like a child will accidentally catch sight of the mortgage statement. And my experience is when they see it, they're stunned.
Yeah.
Yes, that's what it costs to live here every month.
Yep.
And then the shock of finding out how much the house really costs with the interest payments.
Yes.
You've got, the mortgage itself.
And how much you pay over time.
I still don't like to think about that. It's awful. Okay, let's talk a little bit more about campus life and what we're all avoiding by not sending our kids to live at a state university or even a major private university. So, Amy, your kids are pretty much living at home, and
my kids do live at home,
right?
But if I had all the money in the world, I would never send them to live in a dorm at a major private or state university, ever. Because even most adults in our country would never live in such a disgustingly immoral situation.
It's absolutely degraded.
It's very degraded, and for some reason we think that that's a good place for 18 to 22-year-olds to live. That's ridiculous.
I actually heard stories a few years ago. I think possibly my oldest daughter was in college, but nobody else had gone yet. And I was actually volunteering to help out at the local ballet production of The Nutcracker. And I was talking to a couple of women who had kids in school. And the stories they were telling me, one woman's daughter had called up her parents to say, please come and get me. This was her freshman year. She was there a couple of weeks. They wouldn't come. So they said, no, you got to tough it out.
A state university?
I don't know what kind of a college it was, but then her older sister actually went out to visit her, and she came back and said, Mom, you cannot let her stay here. This is unbelievable what she has to put up with. And another story I heard, a very similar story, the girl came back and actually had a nervous breakdown at home. So it's hard to imagine. We really, really, really do gloss over what's going on in these dorms. That just it's barbaric. It really is, and it's crushing for a young person to see this. We are older. We don't put ourselves in that situation ever. We don't have the opportunity to, but to realize to just wave goodbye to a kid and hope for the best and cross your fingers it's just cruel. It really is.
It is cruel. There, as you say, it is degrading, and I've had a few who have done the universities, but they usually graduate to pretty quickly to their own apartments, and it can be done, but it's the luck of the draw, and also sometimes it depends on your kid. Some girls, some young women are much more self-possessed and can let it be known what they will tolerate and not tolerate in their own room. But most young people are not like that. And so it's the vulnerable ones who suffer the most. Also, there's such a huge rate of depression among young people. It's just phenomenal. And I think this is part of it, because of this culture that no intelligent adult would choose to live in. No matter how degraded their lives are, they would still want control over their own bedrooms, their own environments, and they wouldn't pay to live in that kind of a place. The
other problem with this is also it affects your grades. So when you're having to deal with this kind of stuff, you're not going to be performing as well as you could by any means. So then the cost of education really goes up because you're depressed. You're depressed. You have to repeat classes or whatever. Yeah. So it is really a huge. It's like a huge, almost like self-perpetuating problem. That one problem leads to another problem, which leads to another problem, and it kind of continually just erodes. And it's a lot of people go into education thinking, well, this is what I expect. My child is going to do this and that and get this wonderful degree at this college. And gradually their expectations get lowered each time something happens to change it, to challenge that idea. So the idea of what your goals were when you set out and what you ended up with when you finished are often very, very, very different.
Yeah, and parents just end up saying, just get the degree, just get the degree.
And if they had known this ahead of time and started out with a better plan and say, for example, done what Amy's doing, which is have her kids go locally debt-free and live at home, they're probably going to be in a much better situation at the end of 4 years than those who had much higher expectations and hopes and, maybe even based on pride.
And then we'll have to have that conversation with Amy on how you get your kids out of the house, because they know now how well they've got it.
I keep reminding Sam when he's going to have a job.
Okay.
I mean, a real job.
Yeah, and he can contribute to the household. Or...
Yeah, well, yes.
Yeah.
But I think too, one's home should really be a haven, and it's very hard on these young adults when they live in they live in these circumstances that are so stressful.
Right.
Because that's not the place that should be stressful.
Mm-hmm.
That's not the place where you should have to be self-possessed, really.
Mm-hmm.
A solution to getting rid of them is you can also marry them off, and that happened to my older daughter. She just got engaged right before her graduation.
Oh,
so
well done.
So I don't have to worry about that.
And he's older and probably almost debt free.
Just when I have to start paying car insurance for the next kid up, it's like, wow, we got this down.
Yeah, no, that's wonderful. That's a good path.
Yep. That's actually on the good side of the influence at college. It's one of the hidden reasons that I actually think people should talk about more, which is why you go away to college, which is often to find a spouse.
Absolutely.
And so that really weighs in, when you consider the cost of college debt. And like my oldest daughter has graduated with a total debt of $20,000, which is more than I would like, but it's still relatively low. And I keep thinking, well, if I had a provider with a dowry, it would probably be more than that. So maybe this is just the modern day version of a dowry to get your kid married to a nice guy,
Yeah, and
that's right.
I think he knows what he's got his eyes open. He knows
what he's getting into.
Yeah. Up to a point.
Yeah.
I mean, they don't really ever
Nobody
know.
really
Nobody
knows.
really ever knows. Thank God.
Thank goodness they don't.
All that will unfold in God's good time.
That's true. That's why the small Catholic colleges are really good.
It's a huge second benefit, and it was something I was keenly thinking about: is what kind of friends and potential spouses will my kids end up with?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But you've heard me express this before. We are a homeschooling community, and we're not just a small group in Westchester County or Fairfield County. We belong to a larger group because all of us have kids who have gone to some of these small Catholic colleges, or they've been in the small, or they've been in the Catholic homeschooling groups, and there's a connection. So even though your sons won't be going to those small Catholic colleges, they actually are connected, whether they like it or not, because they know many people who are in those. They know them well.
Well, they do like it.
Yeah.
But I'll say that when I was at Karen's daughter's graduation, at one point we were standing on kind of a slope, and down where the road took a turn, we saw a college-age girl, and a college-age young man start talking to each other, and they clearly had just met. Then we kept looking over, and they were still talking to each other. 45 minutes later, they were still intently talking to each other.
Was this one of yours, or
these were just? I think they were just two people that met at the graduation.
Graduations, weddings, all these ways are.
These are natural ways, natural venues for our children to meet other like-minded people, and it stimulates conversation, and it doesn't. My kids, they know that they know what the parameters are for dating. It doesn't have to be anyone in any particular group, but but it helps them it gives them a sense that they belong also to something, that they're not that they're not in a culture all by them, in a culture of one.
One of the things that I did notice that is critical to the families that I see, and this is even more of a general family thing than a specific college thing, but I think it helps out later on, is the families who have a strong sense of identity of their family, like this is who we are. We do this, we do it this way. Not in a kind of pushy, domineering way, which I've also seen, but more in a sort of an artistic way, like our family. For example, our particular family tends to be we read a lot, and we tend to be very artistic. So we do a lot of drawing and painting and get involved with things that have arty kind of things. And it has made it very easy for me to say to the kids, we're not going to watch that movie, or we're not going to do that activity, because there's something about it that I find undercutting the whole way of beauty, the whole way of life that we're trying to go along with here. And I've had very little problems with the kids rebelling against that. Sometimes they'll question me closely, but usually they walk away saying, okay, fine. And we will watch other movies that are okay. But I've noticed that the kids who have that strong sense of who their family is don't seem to feel as swayed when they get out into the world. They readily identify with, this is me, this is not me. And they're very able to discern the difference. Yeah, whereas the kids who just, who don't.
I think that's great. And I think some families are like that. And it, given the genetic makeup of you and your husband, the arts were, going to play strongly in the lives of your kids. So, sometimes the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. The kids are, whether they like it or not, have a lot of the same interests as the parents. And so you can sometimes identify a family as being a really athletic family, or really
but just
artistic
in a sense,
family, or they're all good in business, they're all making,
I mean, even in a sense of, this is who we are, this is our family, these are our stories, these are the way we like to do things.
Yes.
Every family has that potential. And I think it's the kids who don't have that when they go off into the bigger world, into college, feel very much alienated. And they're the ones that become Buddhists.
They
and,
do feel alienated.
And they adopt, a Muslim religion or whatever, something that has a stronger self-identity than they got at home. It's a kind of clannishness, but I think it's a healthy...
the way a family is supposed to develop.
It's a healthy thing.
Super interesting, yeah. As you're saying that, I love the way that your family identifies. And I'm thinking about my family, the Kellys, and sometimes when my kids will say, well, why do I have to do such and such a thing? I'll say, well, we're the Kellys. That's how we do things.
Yeah.
But our family culture is largely based upon participation, I think. Well,
And
why do we have to do that? Because we're the Kellys. We participate.
Participating, organizing, making things happen. You guys have a lot going on.
Yeah, I don't know what my identity would be, but once I was watching television with one of my sons, and he was only 8 years old, and he said, we should turn this off. This looks liberal.
He knew the McCaffreys were not
So maybe
liberal,
that was
and
our
are not.
identity. That's our identity.
We're conservatives here.
Yeah. So, but of course you get that. A family has to have a memory. If they don't have a past, then they don't really have a future. And that memory has to be exercised through family meals, family gatherings, and that's so important to, of course, family life and making a child feel that he belongs somewhere. He has someone to cover his back. Let's see, anything now, with the college campuses, of course, when your father was surmising what was going on in the college campuses back in the 70s, he could see that they were no longer Christian, but now we've gone even further than that. They're anti-Christian, so that there are certain things that you can't even say on campuses anymore. New York State has unfolded a plan to have diversity officers put into the universities, all their 64 campuses. And, the first step is just to determine whether or not the faculty, staff, and student body represent the ethnicity of the community it serves. But the next step is to determine whether or not someone is saying making unwelcome speech, or it's no longer whether or not you're insulting someone, but it's if you're making unwelcome speech. That was one of the big problems at Yale in the past year.
That becomes a problem when what you are makes someone allegedly feel unwelcome.
Yeah.
In other words, your very faith, your very person somehow is going to make somebody feel uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And then you end up with real persecution on your hands.
Right. So if we have universities like this, it behooves all of us serious Catholics, serious Christians out there, serious people of faith, to start looking into alternative paths. Maybe we don't need the state universities. Maybe we'll have to do something else.